Hey guys, how you doing? It's me, the Average Centrist, and I'm here today with Mr. King Critical. Thank you for gracing our lovely screens here.
Hello there, average centrist. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. Thanks for coming on. So you are a YouTuber. You dabble in a bunch of different things. You dabble in critical gender theory,
Yeah,
I expect, and that's your main channel, King Critical. I think you also dabble in some politics and stuff as well, don't you?
yeah. So I've got all sorts. I've got a lot of things which I find interesting. I guess in general, I'm actually quite a fan of the way that what's I guess called content production can mean that like a lot of things that you do can just become content. I had like a friend. Like the first. Well, not actually the first thing, but one of the first things I did in terms of YouTube was I had a friend who we just talk about films with, and then he was like, "Hey, why don't we just talk about?" So I actually had a film channel as well. But
Sweet.
yeah, my main channel, as you rightly pointed out, deals with gender identity politics.
Cool. So, obviously, recently we've been talking a lot about gender and the trans debate, and I'm just trying to find, obviously, different people who can offer their perspective on the situation. You seem to have a lot to say about it, especially with research and in relation to biology as well, which is of particular interest to me. So, I just wanted to ask, though, like, where did you start off with this journey for yourself? Like, how did you come into this debate?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question because it pretty much, I guess it's related to how I came to identify with feminism, which is that initially I was pretty, I'd say I started off having the generic kind of anti-feminist attitude of, well, if it's about equality, why would you call it feminism? That was when I was, quite young, I think 15, 16. And then eventually I kind of moved to more of a neutral stance. And at one point I thought, I've this is going to make me sound very self-important, but I've always had like an interest in kind of challenging ideas I have with lots of research. And I remember that I thought, I want to learn about something, and I want to learn about something which is kind of accessible, like not super esoteric, like, I don't know, metaphysics or something like that,
Sure.
because I was like 17 or 18. But I want to learn about something which, I don't really know about, but it kind of relates to me. And I thought, I'll just learn about feminism and actually see like what the kind of feminist academics and feminist kind of pop authors are writing. And I did that, and that kind of led me into to considering myself a feminist. It didn't take too long. I'm not going to go through the whole like every single book I read, anything like that, but it didn't take too long for me to develop. Like I said, I mean, there's a whole debate about whether or not men can be feminists, but just for shorthand, I'm going to say became a feminist because it's easier than just saying
Yeah, fair
came to
enough.
agree with feminists or things like that. Yeah. So, but then I remember actually, I was reading, and I've always liked the idea of. I mean, I already mentioned how I like the idea of kind of being able to make content out of interest, and I used to want to be kind of a non-fiction author who would, research stuff and write things up on it. And I was, for a very long time, most of the time I was doing my bachelor's at uni, I was thinking I was going to write a book with all the kind of research I had about feminism, and like say like how I became a feminist. And then really in 2017, which was towards the end of me doing my bachelor's, I realized I had a bit of a blind spot in that, I'd not really read much radical feminism, which is weird because I knew about the radical feminism, but it was just kind of the way I approached like the literature, it just ended up being something I hadn't looked at yet. So I ended up looking at that, and I got interested in it, and I thought, okay, some of this is quite compelling in that I think it's, I appreciate people who, I guess I appreciate kind of unconventional views, like even if those views are maybe considered quite controversial.
Sure.
And therefore I started looking into radical feminism, and I kind of encountered gender critical feminism. And I do remember that, so in 2015 when I made my first ever kind of response video in 2015.
Okay.
And I actually I was described recently on Twitter by somebody as a proto bread tuber, and it is strange to me to realize that that's kind of an accurate thing, in that there was actually a sort of little YouTube clique that I was a part of. And I remember I'd speak to all those people. I remember one time somebody mentioned have you ever heard of a channel called Man Cheese? It's quite obscure, so I would think, okay, that's fine. She was, I think her channel's been taken down. She was somebody who dealt with kind of gender, transgender stuff. And I remember somebody in a conversation mentioned her back in 2015. And I do remember looking her up and thinking, like, it had to be like a parody. Like, at that point, the idea of being kind of gender critical, the idea of being kind of pro-feminist but anti-transgender was something that I couldn't even get my head around. And I also did at that point check out the gender critical subreddit for the first time, and I was just like, a bit confused by it, like, oh, what are these people on about? And then I think in 2017, like I say, I actually properly looked at what these people were saying, and I think it was at that point, even just independent of radical feminists, I'd seen some people who were broadly kind of critical of contemporary progressivism, pointing out, for example, if you're going to say you're a feminist and that men and women are kind of the same in terms of their behavior, and from kind of like a sociological perspective, men and women are the same, then to what are you referring when you say somebody is a man in a woman's body or a woman in a man's body? And I thought, that's a valid point. And I, of course, saw a common thing you see, which is, when this question was asked, the people who were on the kind of very pro-trans side of the debate just said, well, it's not our job to educate you, and things like that. And
I hate that.
When I saw that, I was...
I hate that so much. Oh, my God.
very, very skeptical of it, because I was like, well, okay, you say that, but are there good arguments out there? And yeah, basically still in 2017, I made a video which was basically kind of reflecting on, it was like an hour-long unedited video. I've had different kind of periods of, like, in terms of what I've done on my channel, and in 2017 I was actually mostly just uploading unedited videos of me talking to my phone, and it was like an hour-long video of me talking about kind of what I'd noticed on the gender critical subreddit. And a point kind of in the middle, really, I said that gender critical feminists have a kind of intuitively understandable argument, like an argument where you can understand where they're coming from, and that therefore we should, referring in a broad sense to progressives, I guess, actually address their arguments. That's basically what I said, because at this point I still didn't agree with gender critical feminism. And I got a comment saying, I got a comment from a longtime subscriber saying that this was, and I've mentioned this many times, but yeah, he basically said this is like killing trans people to say that we should take gender critical arguments seriously and things like that. And I just thought that was kind of silly. And I think in a weird way, it's sort of just like when it's kind of, I can't think of like the term, but it's a bit like when the smoke and mirrors disappear, it's quite startling how radical the transformation is, in terms of realizing that the whole being trans thing just doesn't make much sense, because it starts off with when you kind of realize, like, oh, a lot of the arguments is these people hate transgender people, and you look and you're like, well, I don't doubt that some of these people have genuine negative emotions towards trans people, but sure, most of them, certainly their ideas aren't based in the hatred of trans people. You hear things like these people are conservative. You don't have to actually speak to that many gender critical people to realize that they are not conservative.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's kind of like, in a weird way, how did I come to have the views I have? It's kind of a matter of, most of it was just, it's almost like, why did I not have the views before, in a way? And the answer to why I didn't have the views before is because I was just completely, I guess, ignorant to what these people were actually saying. I couldn't really get my head around what they were saying. And then as soon as I realized that most of my objection was based on some kind of, I guess, preconceived notions of how gender should be, and also preconceived notions of the political spectrum. I had this idea of well, if you're a progressive, if you're a feminist, you're a progressive, and if you're a progressive, you support trans people. And as soon as that kind of idea fell apart, that's when I realized, like, oh, once you start thinking about things outside of, ironically, I guess, binaries, and actually are able to appreciate nuance, you can kind of, it's quite difficult to not see how the gender critical position makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so what is that position then in relation to trans people?
Yeah, I think it's, well, the issue is, and several people have pointed this out, there isn't exactly a 100% clearly defined gender critical position. Apart from, I would say that the purest gender critical position would be to say that whether you are a man or a woman relates, I guess, exclusively, I'm tentative about kind of language I use, but I think exclusively is appropriate here, to your biology. I've said before that I don't believe that the biology itself fully encapsulates what it is to be a man or a woman, because I think there's kind of an experiential aspect to it. Sure. But I would say that whether you're a man is based on do you have male biology, and whether you're a woman is based on do you have female biology, and therefore this idea of being trans just doesn't exist. Now, having said that, there is a broader kind of peripheral gender critical movement, and I think that is mostly composed of people who, even though they think that there is such a thing as being a trans woman, it's kind of like there's different positions, like there's people who will say like being a trans woman is kind of not, if you're a trans woman you're not a man, but you're also not a woman. Like that's quite a common thing. So that would be like a distinction from obviously the pure gender critical position, which would say, well, if you're a trans woman, you've got male biology, so you're a man. There's lots of people who say, oh, if you're a trans woman, you're not a man, but you aren't a woman. Of course, there's other people who will say, I've spoken to people who've said, like, if you're a trans woman, you're a woman in terms of identity, but you aren't a woman in terms of biology. And then, of course, there's like transmedicalism, people who will say, and I think with the transmedicalism, I think it varies. I think there are probably people who are kind of of the belief that you'd need gender dysphoria to be trans, who wouldn't identify themselves as gender critical feminists. But a lot of people who are transmedicalists, I think, would say, you know what, at least as things stand right now, maybe there'll be an argument further down the line. But as the current culture stands, we as transmedicalists would rather stand with the gender critical feminists who are saying like that really this whole idea of being a trans woman or whatever it is sort of bunk, than stand with the radical trans activists. So I guess, I'm aware that obviously I don't know to what extent I've exactly answered your question of what the gender critical position is. Obviously there's like kind of wider issues, but I would say at its core, it really does quite simply relate to how does it make sense to define man or woman? And there are different opinions in it, but I think the pure gender critical position is say, well, we have this material reality. It's a pretty objective and intuitively obvious material reality. So how about that? That seems like a good way to define man and woman.
Yeah, and broadly, I would actually agree with that. I think I think biology is very powerful. You just have to watch a nature documentary to see that in action. And I just think it is a little strange when I hear some of the pro-trans activists when they talk about self-ID or even just gender being a complete performance and stuff like that. I have to ask. I wonder in my head, like, because it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation in my mind of what came first, the biological necessity or the performance part of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. For me, it just is always the biology came first, and then obviously that informed certain behaviours. Doesn't mean that men and women should be anything necessarily, but it just has informed how those roles have come about, and then obviously men have exploited that throughout history because of that. But I still think there is some level of naturalness to how men and women interact with the world, and yeah, I don't know, that just seems to make sense to me. I just feel like, why wouldn't it? I mean, if the cat instinctively knows how to hunt, why wouldn't a human also have certain instincts or certain behaviors that are kind of intrinsic to their biology?
Yeah, so that's kind of I guess that's called evolutionary psychology, like the idea that we have. Yeah, and I do think that's true to an extent. I mean, you know what? Actually, see, there's a video which will probably be out maybe by the time that this actually goes out,
Okay.
which is going to be a clarification to a video I did probably about a week ago from now, as we're recording, basically on like how I define specifically. It's going to go into how I define male, man, and masculinity. And in it, I do basically, I think it's true that there are, I guess, what could be called, you know, and in a scientific sense, I guess, biological roles. So obviously, men are physically different from women, and I think with that comes attached within, you know, if you imagine like a caveman society, there are going to be certain things that men and women are doing, and I think within sexism, kind of, if you wanted to, well, obviously I was going to say if you want to summarize them as sexism, but I guess one way of understanding sexism is almost like it's the point at which biological roles kind of became sociological roles, where it's like, because obviously I don't think anyone would disagree that if you're going to, you know, if we even, you know, I'd hope in a way almost like even the most radical feminist would agree that, or, you know, like whatever kind of feminist would agree that if we're living in caveman times, then based on just the material reality of the situation, there's things that men should be doing and there's things that women should be doing. But of course, obviously, the significant thing is that as society develops, things become different. But obviously, what you're kind of talking about is the fact that there's probably going to be a degree of kind of mental, you know, like I guess proclivity to behave a certain way. I think that's probably true. My attitude towards it has always been like it's something where I'm willing to concede that it could be the case, but I think it's always a risky game of kind of getting into how much it could be the case because, of course,
obviously that's the nature-nurture argument.
Yeah. Although I would stress, of course, that within when talking about gender-critical feminism, obviously when feminists relate the categories of man and woman to biology, they're just talking about the definitions of the terms rather than the way that men and women may or may not act. Just as like a important thing to kind of stress that it's not like, you know, you can be a gender critical feminist and believe that biology in no way impacts the behavior of men and women. Right. And of course you can be a gender critical feminist and believe that biology does impact. So it's,
sure. Okay.
But, you know, yeah.
Because I have heard like kind of conflicting arguments in that regard.
Yeah.
I've heard some radical feminist women talking about how, like, again, it's a bit similar to what the trans people argue about, is that gender is kind of performative, so who gives a fuck? And when I hear that sometimes, I'm a bit like, when I hear that from the radical feminists who are kind of against the trans people, I can't help but think, well, aren't the trans people actually using that argument to justify why they want to do self-ID and stuff like that?
So, I mean, well, with, maybe I'm a bit confused. So, when you say the radical feminists are arguing that,
well, there's some radical feminists, I mean, like that argue about gender being more performative, or that basically gender roles are not linked to any biology or anything like that. It's just literally just a social condition. It's not really intrinsic to
I think basically the main difference would be that obviously with radical or gender critical feminists, but obviously radical feminists, they'd it would be more like the relevance of those roles and actions don't really affect whether or not somebody is a man or woman. Whereas obviously with I mean it's kind of difficult. It's difficult in a way to compare gender critical feminism to, I guess, what is often called, by the way, gender identity extremism, and that is like a common term for
right.
kind of radical trans activism, like this idea, you know, basically as a way to exclude people who actually relate being trans to any kind of material or, well, any kind of reality. But yeah, the problem is that when it comes to that, being trans is so unclearly defined that it's almost like you can, you know, you can make any kind of comparisons or not, because yeah, you could say that the kind of gender identity extremist position is that gender relates to roles, and that seems to be a recurring thing. But then at the same time, a lot of the time, if you try to actually pin them down on actually saying that, they'll avoid saying that because they realize that kind of makes them look a bit wrong or, you know, like sexist, I guess.
Yeah, because then it comes to a point where are you just like caricaturing women or men or whatever. And you know, and something, and this is a little bit off the topic now, but like I was thinking recently as well about Ellen Page and her transition, and there was something that I've never really felt before, but is something that comes up a lot with the more gender critical feminists that I've seen. But I did have a little bit of a thought about this Ellen Page, where I was like, how is she a man when she's never experienced anything of what it is to be a man at all in her life? Like, I just felt like that was a bit of a weird thing. And again, she can do whatever she wants, but I couldn't help but think that. Like, I was just like, wait a minute. And she doesn't even really look like a guy now. And I'm just like, how is this, like, how does this mean you're a man again? Like, I don't really get it. I don't know.
No, yeah, there's actually a quote. I'm wondering if I can find it, because I posted it to Twitter. It was, I don't think it's going to say, but basically it was pointing out that when people say like feeling like a man and things like that, it gets to a thorny issue, or indeed feels like a woman, which is nobody knows what it feels like to be a man except for a man. It's kind of like almost, I guess, a tautological thing, where it's like, what does it feel like to be a man? Well, I guess it feels like being a man and feeling yourself be a man. So it's kind of like, if you say like, I'm a woman who feels like a man, the obvious thing would be, well, how do you know what it feels like to be a man? Because the only way you can know that is if, so it's kind of like, I guess it's almost like a circular, because it'll be like, the only way you can know what it feels like to be a man is if you are a man. But if you say you're a man because you feel like a man, then how do you know you feel like a man? Unless we already just, so yeah, you can see how that is very circular. And yeah, I do think that, like, ultimately when, Ellen Page says that she's a man, like you already pointed out, first of all, she doesn't look like a man. And then obviously there's just the fact that I guess it's one that she's never experienced being a man. Of course, that's going to be a relevant thing. And then also there's the fact that I would imagine that her experience, and this is kind of the counter, that her experience, or the counterpoint, but in a reinforcing way. I can't think of like the word for that, but that there are loads of gender non-conforming women who acknowledge they're women who will have experiences much more similar to Ellen Page. And I think that's kind of like a key thing to stress, and I think it's something which a lot of people ignore when they talk about kind of the experience of being trans. One of my issues with this whole idea that there's like an experience of being trans is that a gender non-conforming man, especially when they are being gender non-conforming, is going to have an identical experience a lot of the time to a so-called trans woman. So it's like, why would you, if you've got these two people, and of course, by contrast, a so-called trans woman is not going to have very similar experiences to biological women. So it's kind of like, to me, it makes sense to group gender non-conforming men with so-called trans women rather than grouping so-called trans women with women. And, same thing for Ellen Page in the case of trans men.
Okay. So, so just to kind of like boil that down a little bit, like, so you're kind of saying that, so her experiences will be kind of close to being like a trans person, basically, then at this time, now that she's decided to be
well, no, sorry, what I'm stressing, and I guess I need to, I'll just stress this. So I'm pointing to a distinction between being gender non-conforming and being trans. And that, so for example, and a classic example obviously is a drag queen, but you can get more extreme, or well, maybe not more extreme, but you can get less extreme. But like a man who acknowledges they are a man, but does lots of things consciously to embody femininity, that would be somebody you could call gender non-conforming. But significantly, you wouldn't really call them trans. You wouldn't say that somebody who is, because they're not claiming to be a different gender. Although I do realize there are some people who will include gender non-conforming people under the label of trans, which I think even further confuses things. But yeah, basically, the point being that person would still say they're a man. And what I think about a lot is that, and I kind of, something I've said before is that I think a good argument for, I guess in general, why it matters to understand gender a particular way, and also why it makes sense to understand gender in the gender critical way, is because one of the things that we want to do is explain gender depression. So we want to explain, the experiences of women in relation to men, and particularly how that experience can often manifest in oppressive ways. And I think significantly, if we do that, then we can, I think, reasonably draw categories along the lines of how people experience, reality. And obviously, a so-called transgender woman will experience, they could actually experience misogyny, but insofar as they experience misogyny, it's only in that they have actively gone out of their way to try and convince society that they're a woman. And it's pretty obvious how that is not really similar to a woman who experiences misogyny innately because of who they are. If you,
Sure.
And it's kind of like, for a trans woman, if they try really hard to make themselves look like a woman, if they, go through even like facial surgery, make sure they remove all of their hair and things like that to make themselves look convincingly like a woman, then maybe they will experience misogyny. But it's pretty obvious how the experience of misogyny as a result of a conscious, concerted effort to try and trick society into thinking you're a woman is not the same as the misogyny experienced by, let's just say Ella, who you spoke to most recently. And then, of course, the flip side is that most trans people, most so-called trans women, do not come to be convincing as women. And I'd say most of the discrimination trans women are likely to experience is not because of being a woman, but rather it's going to be because they are perceived to be men dressing up as women.
Yeah.
If you think about, there's a gay bar near where I live, and it's, a gay bar, but obviously there's lots of transgender people there. And to be fair, the thing is, there's also significantly, there's probably lots of trans women there. There's also probably lots of cross-dressing men there. But a lot of the time it's, I couldn't tell you which is the first indication. It's kind of like they're similar phenomena. But yeah, basically, when you're talking about two people whose experiences of the world are going to be fundamentally identical, which is to say, let's say a cross-dressing man and somebody who considers themselves to be a trans woman, it makes sense for me to say, well, those two experiences are similar. And I don't really see the point in defining them as different, and not just different, but different in quite a fundamental way. Because if you're talking about gender depression, the fundamental, binary there is between men and women. So if you say like these two people have almost identical experiences, a cross-dressing man and a trans-identified male, but you say actually one of them's a man, one of them's a woman, I think that's just kind of weird when, like most, and I think a very common argument that transgender people will make is they'll say nobody asks for your chromosomes before they decide to discriminate against you. And that's supposed to be used as an argument against the idea that sexism is based on sex, or like misogyny is based on sex. Because like nobody asks if somebody if they've got an XX chromosome before discriminating against them. But I think that argument could be very easily turned around to point out nobody asks how somebody identifies before they discriminate against them. If I see, let's suppose I'm a bigot and I see what looks like a man dressed up as a woman. If I'm, going to laugh at them or make fun of them or even attack them, I'm probably not going to do so based on my assumptions about how they identify. I'm going to do so based on the fact I perceive them to be, violating conventional gender. So yeah, that's why I kind of think it makes sense to, broad, looking at it in kind of broad experiences of society, the entire category of being trans doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, that's fair enough then. So on that basis, then, would you say that you're against just like legislation to do with trans people at all? Then, in that case,
yeah, that's an interesting thing actually. I do think one of my issues is, and I was speaking to, I spoke to somebody who kind of said like that this idea of sex change and gender change, I guess, is that it's a legal fiction that's intended to just kind of make things easier for people who have gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
And I think, and that is kind of just like a pro idea of saying like, well, it's just kind of a made up thing to make them happy. And I do think an argument could be made of like, that's acceptable. And I think a lot of, the person I was speaking to in this case was a gender critical feminist. I think for a lot of people that is quite a, I guess, tempting sort of compromise to just say, okay, it's, like I say, a legal fiction. We pretend you're a woman because it will make you happier in terms of like our legal system, but with the implication being that you aren't really, it's just we're pretending it. Although, of course, I do think when you do that, it opens up the obvious question, which is, well, what makes somebody a woman? And obviously, that's kind of relevant if we're saying, that this person becomes a woman. If we say that legal sex changes constitute authentic reality changes from being a man to a woman. But in terms of a legal fiction, actually, I think I kind of want to say, I think there is an argument to be made that like our laws should reflect reality, and if we're going to say that somebody is not in fact a woman, then we shouldn't have laws that imagine they are. But I also think you can make an argument that actually our laws should really be about reducing harm. I do think that's a legitimate thing. What I'm very much against people who say we should understand gender in reality in a way that's conducive to reducing harm, because I think at the end of the day, there's other examples where we might not do that. Like really what understanding reality is about understanding reality. It's not about reducing harm. But in terms of laws, people might say, well, with our laws, what we really want to do is just make it so that, if somebody's got gender dysphoria, they're not depressed. And I'm willing to say that makes sense. But I do think even then there would be a debate. And I think this is a debate which I can't take a strong opinion on or a firm stance on. But basically, whether or not it is better to allow people with gender dysphoria to live out, what is basically a delusion, or alternatively, that we should be doing what we do in the case of many other kind of issues that cause people mental distress, which is therapy, whatever kind of therapy it would be, and trying to help those people. And I think probably what I'd again say is maybe a compromise, although admittedly a compromise within a compromise, is to say like that we could have, yes, okay, let's have this legal fictional idea that there's such a thing as sex change, but within that, I think it would make sense to, if you're going to have a sex change, or so let's say a legal sex change, as it were. So say like I want to be considered a man instead of a woman, or I want to be considered a woman instead of a man, that should come with therapy, and it should come with therapy that is not necessarily geared towards 100% making sure that person completely gets over their dysphoria or whatever, but at least keeping open the idea that dysphoria is something which people can get over. Because I think that's a useful thing. I think it's what I'm concerned about with a lot of contemporary trans activism is that they want to completely close the door on the idea that people can get over gender dysphoria, that it's a thing that somebody can have and then, overcome. And I think that's quite a harmful idea. And obviously we're seeing that now with the ideas of outlawing trans conversion therapy and things like that, that they're basically saying we need to completely shut down this idea that anybody can get over gender dysphoria, which I think is unfortunate, especially when it comes to reducing harm, because there seems to be some evidence, some quite strong evidence, that no amount of affirmation will stop the fact that people with gender dysphoria will always feel a degree of kind of being upset and not feeling good, like anxiety, depression, things like that. And, a lot of trans activists will say, well, that's only caused by people, not affirming their gender and things like that. But honestly, I think we don't really know. And I suspect that the chances are that a lot of people who, think that they are a woman instead of a man, who have a male body, are always going to feel that degree of kind of anxiety, depression, obsession, that's going to make their lives worse. And therefore, I'm against this idea that we should, or perhaps, to phrase it more kind of positively, I support the idea that we should try to make sure we as a society foster this idea that there is always a pathway out of gender dysphoria for people suffering from it.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting. I haven't actually really thought of that. Because in my mind, gender, or at least the way that a lot of people talk about gender dysphoria, is that they usually have it from a really young age and is persistent throughout their life. And a lot of people who transition, and I guess you could say pass, tend to say that a lot of their dysphoric feelings kind of go away. Obviously not completely, but like generally speaking, it helps them. Obviously this isn't true for everyone, but for some that is true, apparently, or at least that's what they say. I'm just trying to think, like...
Well, I mean, I will say, actually, I think it's one of the issues that I think surrounds this whole thing is that a lot of the contemporary phenomenon is quite new. Like this idea of having, people transitioning and also having that be a thing in the public conversation and stuff like that. So I think it's unfortunate that debate is being shut down around this topic, because I think the reality is that this is something which, to an extent, needs to be observed, but obviously it's an issue where it needs to be observed, but also fundamentally, there's like a term in science for this, I can't think what it is, but the idea that like a lot of the time, as you're observing something, you're also going to impact it. I think that's kind of like the relationship society is going to have to this idea of people being transgender. But yeah, basically, the point being that I suspect we don't fully know exactly, we don't have any kind of realistic idea of how these ideas about gender are going to affect people in the long term, because these ideas about gender are relatively new, and certainly the idea of them being like an accepted thing and a thing in the kind of the public zeitgeist is only really a few years old, until you can look at stuff from the 2000s, as in, from 2000 to 2010, and it's clear that there is like a kind of sense of confusion around what it really means to be transgender. What we have now of like this idea, I mean, obviously the idea of like people being non-binary and things like that, that's very new. And also, I mean, I think in the 2000s and, probably before that, but there was a common thing of post-op transgender people being played by women. So, in a way, it's kind of like, it shows that this idea of what it actually means to be a post-op transsexual and things like that was something which society wasn't ever really exposed to until recently.
Yeah. So yeah, like you say, it is really new, and it's a bit of a barrage to the public in a way, and I'm still kind of dealing with the fact of like it does seem like, given the stories of trans people who do seem to somewhat get over their dysphoria, then that even by transitioning, that does suggest that there are ways to probably do it without transitioning as well, right? Like you say,
that's a good point. I mean, I think for me, and I'll admit this is something I've not looked into probably as much as I could have. I don't really know much of the kind of proper psychotherapy aspect of it, but to me, it's always seemed like gender dysphoria is kind of like a bit of an OCD thing, like a kind of and because obviously OCD is about having these things in categories and being and obviously OCD, it doesn't have to refer to being tidy. I remember I watched this thing about and admittedly this is going to be one of those things where people who I come across as or give away how not informed I am, because one of my sources I'm going to refer to now is a documentary it was either BBC or Channel 4. Okay. But basically it was I think it was a woman talking about OCD, and her OCD took the form of being absolutely convinced that she had murdered somebody and got away with it.
Whoa!
And like that was her thing, and she was torn apart by guilt, or right. From guilt by this idea, and like basically they were able to kind of, it was like they knew that she hadn't actually murdered somebody and got away with it. I can't remember how, but yeah, like the whole thing was that she had to get this treatment to help her deal with this belief she had that she had murdered somebody and got away with it. And the treatment she did was interesting, and I'm not going to go into that, but basically that's kind of how I feel about this whole like if somebody can believe like I've murdered somebody, I've got away with it, and that can be like something they believe so much that it's causing them guilt, that it's causing them distress. I don't see why it's unreasonable to think, when you're dealing with something much more kind of ethereal, like this idea of gender, like theoretical this idea of gender, that people can have ideas about that. I mean, I recently, and you possibly saw this. I had an issue with health anxiety, just within the last
I did see
last week.
something about that.
Yeah, and the it kind of developed over a period, but basically it ended up with me being worried I had cancer, and I have a mole on my back, and it's kind of like, it's a strange enough looking mole. And I am actually going to see the dermatologist about it on Tuesday. But yeah, basically,
good luck with that.
I got a slight, but I'm pretty confident now because the pain is gone. But I got a pain on it, last week, and the pain was so bad. Like, I mean, I say it was so bad. It wasn't like excruciating or anything, but it was like constant and ever present. And I was worrying about it. I was thinking, like, I shouldn't have a mole that's just constantly hurting. That doesn't seem like a good sign.
Yeah.
And it was, and I reached a point where I was like, kind of looking in the mirror thinking, you've just got to resign yourself to the reality that you definitely have cancer. You just got to accept it. You've got to start just thinking about how you're going to approach it, how are you going to deal with the chemotherapy, or how's it going to affect like your life, assuming at this point that I'd probably get cured from it, but thinking like, oh, you're going to have chemotherapy, you're going to have it removed, it might metastasize, and you're going to have to have surgery somewhere else. And I was like genuinely like convinced, and just saying to myself, like, you've got to resign yourself to that. And obviously, now the pain's completely gone. Every single symptom that I thought I had is gone. And I've had other examples of that. Like, I thought I had a kidney infection. I was getting genuine like pain in my kidney. And then I got the test back from the doctor, and they said, nope, no sign of kidney infection at all. No sign of anything wrong with your kidneys. But that's the thing. Like, when you think about the fact that your mind can convince you that you have actual physical symptoms, when your mind can convince you that you've committed a murder, this idea that somebody can believe, oh, I should have been born a woman, or I should have been born a man, and it was a mistake that I wasn't, and that they would kind of tear themselves apart over that belief. I think, yeah, I can certainly believe that's true, but I'd also think, doesn't it make sense to treat that the way you would treat it in any other case? Like any other example of something like that, you would say, well, that sounds like, and it almost seems like the attitude as well, because gender is quite a woo-woo concept anyway, we can sort of just pretend these people are men or women. But obviously, there's a question of, is that even, the way of least harm? Obviously, certainly the thing we're quite content to do in all other cases, if somebody has a kind of obsessive belief which is causing them harm, is to work on treating that belief, not work on trying to get reality to conform to it. So yeah, I agree with you that it does seem like something which could be treated.
And it's. What was I going to say? Like, when it comes to there comes a point where, as well, like, what is the responsibility of other people to go along with somebody's delusion as well? Like, there has to be something to be said for that, because on the one hand, I do think in life, trans people should be afforded some level of respect where people can, they can be treated however they want to be treated in their own communities, basically.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to legislation and stuff like that, or even trans athletes and all that kind of stuff, that's when the delusion starts to meet reality. And then I do wonder, like, is it everybody else's responsibility to go along with your delusion, or do we? Is there a point where we can say no? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I mean, I do think one of the I was thinking about this, and I've been thinking about it for a while. I think one of the big hurdles for kind of the gender critical movement, let's say in the UK, obviously the gender critical movement's doing quite well in the UK in the grand scheme of things, but even then not great. One of the big hurdles to overcome is the classic kind of, it doesn't affect you. And I think it's something which I think is comes from this very kind of, I don't necessarily want to assume some kind of grand conspiratorial goal, but I think it's kind of happened by accident, this association between being transgender and being LGB, or, same-sex attracted, where basically, obviously, nowadays people say LGBT all the time. And of course, if you say LGB, a lot of the time, even just saying LGB and dropping the T is considered hateful in itself. So there's a big kind of push to make it so it's almost like people assume that being same-sex attracted and having this idea that you were born as the wrong sex or wrong gender is like the same thing. And that's... it's kind of, it should be intuitively obvious how they're actually quite different things. But I do think it leads to kind of a lot of the rhetoric that has been used for kind of fighting for the rights of same-sex attracted people is now being kind of reappropriated for transgender people. And you can see that obviously in the case of the talking about conversion therapy, but also in terms of this idea of it doesn't affect you. And that's like a quite common thing, which obviously when you talk about two, let's say, gay men being in a relationship with each other, it, for all practical, purposes, doesn't affect you. And I'll admit, one of my favorite kind of, I can't think of like the recreational debates, like a debate which I don't actually think matters in the grand scheme of things, but I enjoy having, is arguing with people who genuinely believe that kind of the existence of gay people and kind of the affirmation of gay relationships is bad for society. I actually think it's an interesting, just because I'm like, why do you think that? And and obviously the thing is, you can usually, so I'll say things like, parents, children need both a mum and a dad, and you can point out, well, hold on a minute, there's loads of children who are growing up with neither a mum nor a dad, so surely it's better. It's easy. But yeah, the point being, generally speaking, it's very easy to point out it doesn't affect you, so why do you care? And lots of people are kind of doing out the transgender argument now. They're saying like, it doesn't affect you whether or not somebody wants to come out as trans. I know that a lot of people kind of say they characterize it in terms of how easy it is. That's like, it's very easy to just accept somebody's a woman when they have a penis and testicles and things like that. But in terms of countering that, I think there's kind of three approaches. The first one, I'll address it in kind of this order. So the first one would be I think just pointing out things like you say, women's sports. Also, you can kind of talk about like feminist analysis, like how it impacts feminist analysis and feminist activism. Obviously, things like, for example, lots of there's women who have campaigned for like 50-50 gender representation in parliament. Not necessarily as a legal thing, but as like a goal. And people could very rightly point out, and lots of, at least one person who's associated with the 50-50 campaign in Parliament to get 50% women, 50% men, has come out and said that she is concerned. This is Andrea Carey-Filler, who was running to be with the Green Party, has said that she's concerned that now, apparently, that includes any man who decides he's a woman would be considered, and that's a weird thing. So, you can point out that. The issue with that, I think, is it's thornier. I don't like just holding up this one finger. It's much thornier to have that discussion, because you have to get into, which, I think, to be fair, people who have the patience for it, it's very good to go for that argument, because it is a tangible argument of pointing out things like, I say, women's sports. The second thing is, and this is the one which I point out quite a bit, and have kind of grown into pointing out, because I think it's a good one in terms of trying to get people to understand, like trying to get trans activists to understand, is that if I say I'm a man, I'm not just saying I'm a man, I'm also saying I'm a man, or, that's not the entirety of my identity. There's also the aspect of why I'm saying I'm a man. And in my case, I would say that I'm a man is related to my biology. So the point I would make is that somebody who says that my biology is irrelevant to me being a man is denying my identity just as much as I would be denying somebody's identity if I said that their, self-identity is irrelevant to them being a man. So basically the point being that I say that because I think it's a useful way to try and get people to understand that I have just as much a right to fight for how I define gender and being a man or a woman as anyone else does. And then obviously there's the third thing, and this is the kind of thing you're getting to, which is the aspect of having to force people to intellectually assent to an idea based on the idea that, they are bigoted if they don't. And certainly, and of course also attached to that, I mean, it's either that they have to actually believe it, and then of course there's the other thing, which is they have to actually pretend they believe it. And that's obviously a big concern, because I'm sure if you want to be a teacher in the UK, you are going to have to call people by the gender they identify as, and it does create an interesting debate, really, an interesting concern, which is, well, people do have a right to believe what they believe, and certainly with this specific debate, it's like it's much harder to just passively disagree. You know, like obviously, for example, if you're a teacher who thinks that Judaism is complete nonsense, you probably you can go through your entire day without that coming up.
Yeah.
But if you're a teacher who has a student who says that they are trans, that is something which could affect you. Let's say you're a PE teacher. Obviously, in the UK, generally PE classes are split, boys on one side, girls on the other. You know, like I was in a boys class in PE, obviously, and if I think Americans might call it gym, if there's somebody who considers themselves to be a boy, but actually they've got female biology, then if you're a teacher who disagrees with that, you can't just passively disagree. You kind of have to take a stance. So I think, this idea that it doesn't affect you, it's almost like it's hard to think of anything that could be further from the truth. This is something where you literally can't really be passive about it.
Also,
it definitely
why
affects
should
you.
that matter? Because there's plenty of white people that care about, say, racism, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
At the end of the day, like, people can care about whatever they want.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shit argument, really, to just say, oh, it doesn't affect you, Because there is also other bigger effects, like, because I don't mean to cut you off here, but like there's
That's fine.
But there is like larger effects, because this is something that I try to talk to most people about, is like the trend effect, and how big of an influence is that, and how many people get caught up in that. And I spoke to a detransition not long ago called Courtney Coulson, and she said that she feels it's actually quite a big part of the problem. She says she feels like she may have been caught in that somewhat as well, and there's plenty of people who do. And I just wonder, like, with pro-trans activists, like, how do they really defend that? Because it seems like they just don't even broach that topic at all, really. But like, I don't know.
No, actually, I think that's a good point, and I do think that's actually a very good point relating to, and I remember the whole idea of like people like to suggest that, to imagine that there is some kind of social contagion aspect to current ideas about gender, that is in some way paranoid or something like that. But the reality isn't. And of course, it's difficult because, of course, obviously, most other kind of identity issues are based in material reality. So sexuality is based on, we can know that gay people have always existed because we can know that two people who were men had sex in the past,
Sure.
And how exactly we know that is like a bit complicated, but I mean, let's just say in the Bible, for example, it says, like, if mankind lies with another man, then that's, and I think there's like plenty of Greek documents about two men going at it.
Roman walls paint a lot of pictures.
yes, exactly. So we know that happens because obviously we have material reality, and we can say, well, that's what being gay is in material reality. We can tell that those two people, and obviously there's the fact that sexuality, like the categories of sexuality, are to an extent social constructs. Obviously in Rome they had like a different idea about what it meant to be like gay. Like I think they thought it was more about whether or not you're passive or active and things like that. But with gender, or rather gender identity, we don't really have that same aspect because there isn't really a material reality to it. So it's not as if there is a history of, because you can't look at like you say, you can look at a Roman wall and see two men with obvious male genitalia doing something and be like, okay, that's people being gay. The problem is you can't look at a Roman wall and see a picture of a man and be like, oh, look, there's the woman essence that's been drawn on there, so that person must have been transgender. That doesn't exist in reality, which means that it's kind of hard to tell to what extent this even is a thing that has existed historically. But certainly it is true that I suspect, I'm sure you could probably, there's probably a way you could actually do a study about this, like kind of extrapolate it from the data. But if you kind of got, say, the percentage of people right now who identify as trans, and then you got the percentage of like trans people who apparently commit suicide, whatever that is right now, you could extrapolate like, oh, there should have been this many, if this isn't something that's been caused by society, but it's just something that has, if anything, been mitigated by society, accepting trans people, then we should be able to go back in time and see that more people, a bigger percentage of people, whatever else, were committing suicide and things like that. Whereas in reality, it seems like actually there are more people identifying as trans, not because it's coming to reflect, it's not as if there were all these people in the closet about being trans in the past or anything like that. It seems like people are getting this idea introduced to them. And of course, the big issue with it, and I don't know when I was, this is the thing I was thinking about, and I can't think when I was thinking about it. I think actually it's in a video which I've scripted, which I haven't actually uploaded yet, but I'll just give away the details. Basically,
exclusive.
The point was this idea of so somebody was the person I was talking to, or the person I was responding to, was basically saying that this idea that children can learn to be trans from learning about being trans at school is in some way equivalent to the idea that children can learn to be gay by learning about being gay in school. And the issue with that is that being gay is based in material reality. So I would assume, like, if you as a kid get this idea that you are gay, and let's imagine that you're young, you don't really understand sexuality, and you hear about homosexuality, and maybe, I don't know, you well, just because you're a kid or whatever, you decide, actually, you know what, I am gay. Well, the key thing there is that there is going to be a moment when you hit puberty and you develop actual meaningful feelings of sexual attraction, and then you see other men and you are either going to be physically attracted to them or not. The point is, you can't trick somebody really into thinking that they're gay. You can teach a kid about being gay for as long as you like, and who knows, maybe if a kid is sufficiently confused, they will be like, oh yeah, you know what, yeah, maybe I am gay. But the key thing is, there's going to be a point later on in that kid's life when they actually realize the material reality of being gay, and at that point, if they aren't gay, they're not going to be down with it. They're not going to be that enthused by it. But the important thing is, when it comes to gender identity and transgender identity, there is no material reality to disabuse people of the notion that they're trans. If you teach a kid that they, this idea of being transgender, and if that kid is confused, maybe because they don't really get what gender is, which I think makes sense, because I don't think, like, this whole idea of gender is very confusing, and they decide that they're trans, there isn't necessarily ever going to be a physical reality that they're going to have to confront, which will, change their mind. So the key thing is that because being transgender is an idea that exists entirely within the mind, yes, I think you probably can kind of increase the number of people who have that feeling. And of course, I mean, based on the fact that it does seem to be just a mental phenomenon, well, things like depression, things like anxiety, these things will come and go. Depending on the society. And certainly I think right now, we do live in a society which is increasing the number of people who have these ideas about gender. And certainly, we can actually, as a society, change our attitudes, and that would, of course, reduce the number of people who are detransitioning, or rather, reduce the number of people who have to detransition. And I can't remember whether or not you said this while we were actually recording, but the fact that I don't think you did you? I don't know if you mind me saying it. Basically, you said that that at one point you were having some confusion about your own gender. And you were thinking that you kind of may have, but for a slightly but for a twist of fate, maybe, let's say, have actually gone down the rabbit hole yourself and ended up being a detransitioner. And I think that's a valid point, because I remember I can't even remember when this was relative to my developing opinions about gender identity, but one of my mum's friend's sons, who I'd met a few times just by dint of him being my mum's friend's son, so she would meet, she'd go to see a friend and I'd go hang out with him. He had decided that he was a transgender woman. Right. And then he went to the doctors, and the doctors apparently made a very particular point of stressing, like, okay, I need to stress though, if you get the surgery, you will potentially never have an erection again. You know, this surgery will change your body. It will make it so you fundamentally do not work the same sexually. And apparently, according to what my mum's friend told my mum, and of course my mum's friend was supportive of this guy transitioning, but what she said to my mum was that when he heard that, it kind of hit home, and he realized actually he didn't want to become, you know, no longer a male. He you know, no longer kind of have male kind of attributes and have his body kind of physiologically function as it should. He wanted that to stay the case, and of course, therefore, he didn't transition. But it's not surprising to imagine that that a doctor could certainly not have made as much of a point about stressing that, and then maybe he would have transitioned. And of course, you know, maybe that all sounds completely theoretical until you, of course, realize that there are many people now coming out as detransitioning, which is basically, you know, an idea which only, because this happened, you know, like a decent couple of years ago. And I did think, you know, to myself, oh, you know, that actually does show how there are some concerns about this idea of, you know, gender is something that people can get roped into and maybe make choices they might regret. But at that point, I was like, well, you know, this is all theoretical. You know, we don't know whether or not people might have gone along with it. But now we do, because there is such a, you know, growing visibility for detransitioners. So
I think it's kind of just self-evident anyway. I mean, if you look back through history, there's been various different trends of hysteria and stuff like that crop up. Like I like to use one about suicide in Bridgend in Wales. There was a time in the early 2000s where a bunch of teenagers started killing themselves. And it actually became a trend. It was like a trendy thing. They'd put stuff on their MySpaces and stuff like that about suicide, and then kill themselves in this kind of grandiose way of, I don't know, leaving this world, I guess. You wouldn't be surprised to know that a lot of them were like kind of emo-ish type people and stuff. Yeah. And it was, you know, it was a problem. And eventually that trend died away, but it was a trend. And if a trend could be made out of suicide, I mean, even 13 Reasons Why is another one to look at.
Oh, yeah, and of course that did.
You know, so like it's one of them where it's like, well, if a TV show like 13 Reasons Why can generate a trend of kids killing themselves, then how can it not be said that the massive monolithic thing of like trans by like all these huge companies, Twitter, and people encouraging it all over the place, it's getting into schools, it's getting all over the place. How could that possibly not generate that response? Like it feels like it's inevitable. That's a good point. And I think in a weird way, a lot of you know, radical trans activists, gender identity extremists, they have this kind of, it's weird, they almost have a naivety about I guess how kind of plastic the human society is, and how like society can develop. Because I guess, you know, they have this idea that a mental phenomenon of believing you should be a different gender in some way is actually a real, you know, reality. And you think, but when you actually look at society, you realize how there are far more kind of real things than this, which aren't actually kind of based in a inalterable reality, but are just the result of sociological phenomenons. So it's very strange how reluctant they are to accept this idea that this might be something that emerges from society. And I think it's in general, like a lot of the stuff which I guess like the perception of gender identity extremism and trans activism that it has, I think, is almost in a lot of ways actually, when you really break it down, contrary to reality. For example, I mean, I've pointed out that I think trans activists, a lot of people might say that they are complicating the idea of gender. But I would actually argue that they tend to be incredibly naive as to how complicated gender is, because they want to just say, like, oh, you know, if you identify as a woman, you're a woman, you know, woman is just a thing that exists in your brain and stuff like that. Whereas obviously the reality is that gender and your attitude towards gender is something which is very complicated. And the relationship between how you feel about your gender and your actual gender might be a complicated thing. It's not as simple as just, oh, you feel like you're a woman, therefore you're a woman. You know, it's actually the case that
a lot of the time, I think trans activists can be accused of simplifying things. I think that's definitely true in their attitude towards, gender as a sociological phenomenon. They want to believe, oh, well, if lots of people believe this thing, then it must be reflecting an actual reality that, we just have to kind of passively accept, rather than admitting that, hey, maybe it's something which we're causing, maybe it's something which could potentially be an issue. And yeah, of course, with regards to the suicide thing, it's been pointed out by plenty of people that introducing the idea of suicide can increase instances of suicide, which is, of course, another reason why it's quite harmful when having discussions about harm to say, like, oh, we need to accept transgender people because otherwise they'll commit suicide. And it's like, well, let's be a bit cautious about kind of introducing that idea, because there's a chance that actually saying that it could cause suicide is actually a lot more harmful than saying, hey, you can listen to me disagree with how you define gender and not kill yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I think that doesn't get spoken about enough, I think, is that there's a lot to be said about accepting yourself, I think. And it seems like that's kind of lost in this discussion, because obviously with the agenda for the pro-trans people is to be able to say, I can be whoever I construct myself to be. But in a way, I just feel like that makes a lot of them quite unhappy, because it's almost like they're running away from their real selves. And I know this is a bit more of like a philosophical point, I guess, but it's just, I don't know, I just kind of noticed that a little bit, and I think it's important that, like, maybe part of the way in which people could be treated for this is more looking at their insecurities with themselves and why they might even be wanting to transition in the first place. Like, what inadequate, like if it's a guy wanting to be a woman, what inadequacies does he have in his life that is even making him want to do that in the first place?
You know what, actually, I kind of need a piss, so
Yeah,
you're okay
fine
to cut this, but I don't, just much more relaxed now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. I'm just going to make a cigarette, by the way. So if
oh, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I do think the idea of accepting yourself is important. Actually, I think I do think one aspect of trans activism on the subject of harm is it's very harmful, I think, to the goal of normalizing mental health issues. Because obviously I've been quite frank about my mental health issues. I think lots of people who deal with them are growing increasingly comfortable talking about their mental health issues, and I think that's a that's a very good thing for society to just say, like, hey, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have whatever else. And I think it's quite concerning that it's considered offensive to say that thinking you are a man when you're not a woman, and being incredibly driven to mental anguish by that idea is considered kind of offensive. Like, that's considered, and if anything, it's almost considered like the zenith of bigotry to say, like, oh, you're that's a mental illness. Like, if someone says, yeah, I was, if I said, like, oh, I feel like I'm a woman, and I know I'm a woman, and I'm truly driven to the point of mental anguish at the idea that I'm not a woman, it should be obvious that somebody can say, oh, that's a mental illness you suffer from. But no, in saying that, that's considered bigoted. I think that's very harmful to kind of normalizing mental health issues, because of course it's not offensive, it's not an insult to say somebody suffers from a mental illness. It's not intended as an attack. It's actually something that's usually said, I think, from a position of compassion.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you mention this idea that lots of people who consider themselves trans probably have other stuff going on, I think that's definitely true. And I think that it's quite possible, actually, that teaching people who have mental health issues that they are trans, and then telling them that it's not a mental illness and that they don't have mental health issues attached to it, could cause a lot of harm and cause them to kind of continue to have to deal with those mental health issues without getting the help they need, because they've got it all wrapped up in this sociological kind of fiction of being transgender.
Yeah, Yeah, I think it does kind of follow, yeah. And I get what you're saying. It's not really an insult. They do try and posit it that way, don't they? But it is, but it isn't. Like, if someone was telling me they were down, and I said, well, it sounds like you might be depressed, which is obviously a mental health problem. Like, no one's going to sit there and go, oh my God, I can't believe you're such a bigot for saying that to me, you know?
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. But yeah, so it's interesting that you say that. Yeah. I'm trying to think of, like, in saying all this in these positions, where do we try and find common ground with the trans activists? Because it does seem that, like, obviously, a lot of the things that we're saying mean that we're kind of diametrically opposed to a lot of the stuff that they believe in. Almost everything, basically. But, like...
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do want to give people some level of charity to say that they are telling the truth at times. Like, you know, I use my own personal discretion for that, but I do believe some people really believe they're going through this, whereas other people might have other motivations for it.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because I do think there is one side which is more extreme, and you've said that your goal here is to and I know you didn't say this on the camera in the recording, so I'll just remind. I'll remind you and tell everyone else. Basically, basically, you said that your goal was to try and get people from both sides of the discussion.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think it is likely you will find it quite difficult to find people from the other side of the discussion. I think you might get lucky with much smaller channels, but I think in general, you know, even channels of similar sizes to mine, like, you know, 2,000 subscribers, 3,000 subscribers, which are trans, I think have already reached a point where why would they defend that? Why would they, you know, come and talk and defend their ideas? Because I think it's kind of weird. I do think deep down they kind of realize that they can't really, you know, in an honest, open format. And, you know, they don't have any advantage from it because they've already got, like, enough subscribers and things like that. You know, I think it is quite rare, and I think it's usually it's not the major players who are going to talk about this. And I think it's certainly realistic that you could get the biggest, and I actually, to be honest, can't think of what the biggest gender critical channel on YouTube would be. I mean, you could say it's Ariel Scarcella, but I guess, you know, she's kind of gender critical. Like, let's say, you know, there's a chance you could get her, let's say, to come on your show. Maybe you'd have to kind of build things up a bit more, but it's not unrealistic. But suffice it to say, you're never going to get, like, well, you know, ContraPoints or Philosophy Tube or things like that.
I mean, they explicitly don't
like,
debate these things anyway, but, like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, basically, it's the issue is it is very hard to have a debate. I'm kind of reminded of, there's a guy called David Wood who talks a lot about kind of contemporary Islamic apologetics, and one of the things that is in opposition to it, and he's got this term he refers to, which is the 99-1 rule. And basically the way he talks about it is he says it's something which a lot of kind of big Muslim kind of speakers and I guess apologists do, which is, if you say something which is a complete lie, but is a lie which is kind of, you know, has power to change people's minds, then 99% of people will just believe you, and only 1% of people will actually kind of question you. And, you know, so if you say, like, for example, I don't know, like, Muhammad was the world's first feminist. If you say that's like a group of kind of, let's say, moderate Muslims, I don't know, then 99% of them will be like, yeah, that's true, yeah, he was, and then they'll go out and they'll spread that idea. And I think it's kind of, there's a similar phenomenon with trans activism, where, you know, because I do think about the fact that when trans activists say, like, oh, gender critical feminists are conservatives and they're like the natural allies of conservatives and things like that, it's so obviously false. And I think, like, you know, you'd think in a sense, like, people would realize as soon as they realize, hold on, yeah, loads of these people are not conservatives at all, and a lot of the arguments that they are just really fall apart. You think that lots of people would be like, oh, well, obviously, if they're lying to me about that, they're lying to me about other stuff too, and those people change. But I do think it's probably true that, like I say, the idea of the 99-1 rule is applying, where 1% of people might actually critically think, oh, are they? You know, and like kind of go into and look into it and evaluate it. But 99% of people who watch a Lindsay Ellis video or something like that, who, let's say, have never really thought about the trans kind of debate at all, are just going to think, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds probably true. I mean, you know, she wouldn't say it unless it was true, and things like that. And I do think that kind of makes the debate harder. I think, in short, it's see, the issue is, in some sense, there can't exactly be a pure compromise, in that I think gender critical feminists can't exactly give anything up because the things they're asking for are so reasonable. And I'll give an analogy here, so like, or an example. For example, I'd say most gender critical feminists probably say they want there to just be a debate about this topic where anybody is open to come out and say, not just that they have concerns about, you know, women's private spaces and women's sports and things like that, but also even like that they fundamentally disagree with defining gender the way that it is being defined. Like that basically, so significantly, not even that trans activists have to change the way they understand gender, but just that they have to tolerate other people defining gender a different way. That would be quite a reasonable, I would say. Like, I mean, that should be kind of the compromise position, you know, of like, well, you can define gender your way, I'll define gender my way, and we can have a discussion about it. That should be the compromise position. But the funny thing is, we're in a situation now where the arguments that, or the kind of desires, did I just freeze a bit? I hope not.
No.
Okay. I think I just froze on my end. I don't know if we're a bit out of sync. I hope not. Anyway, the claims that, or the requests that gender critical feminists are making are so reasonable because of how radical the shift has been. Like, gender critical feminists have had to kind of move to a more reasonable position. So reasonable, and the kind of position of the trans activists is so radical that even the compromise position is basically the gender critical position. Like, there are very few gender critical feminists out there saying like that trans people should be kind of attacked for defining gender the way they want. They're just saying, hey, let's both be able to define gender the way we like and have a conversation about it. But the trans activists are saying gender critical feminists should be attacked for defining gender the way they want. So it's kind of like the gender critical position right now is the compromise position on most issues. Obviously, you know, there are gender critical feminists who, and obviously the gender critical position in theory is all the way over here. But in terms of like the actual kind of immediate claims or the immediate kind of desires gender critical feminists have, it is the compromise position. It's things like, let's have informed consent when it comes to children transitioning. Let's have an acknowledgement that different people might transition to for different reasons. Let's have an acknowledgement that some trans people might actually be doing it for illegitimate and kind of
nefarious,
I guess, cynical, reasons. Those are kind of like and of course, let's have a situation where we can both define gender the way that we think makes sense and have a discussion and a conversation about that. Those are really the immediate claims that gender critical feminists are making. And all of those are quite, you know, like I say, pretty much the compromise positions anyway. Whereas, of course, what the trans activists are saying is that, you know, basically if you define gender in a way that disagrees with them, you should lose your job or be kicked out of a political party.
Come down with the cudgel then, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, in a weird way, it's almost like I have to find myself saying there can't really be a compromise, because really what we should have is just the everything I want, because everything I want is the compromise position in a weird, you know, like sense. Yeah. But yeah, you know, I think it's I suppose actually I'll give a slightly more I guess kind of optimistic answer, which is I do think probably the best thing, like what would be nice, and even as I say kind of optimistic, it's like a thought of like a thing which is more likely to happen, but I guess it's kind of depressing in that it's still unlikely to happen, would just be a situation where gender critical feminists and, let's say, kind of queer theory feminists could at least work together on the areas where they agree. Like, not even that, you know, these kind of different people could hold to the same position on the kind of transgender issue, or even have any kind of dialogue on the transgender issue, but just that two people who disagree on the transgender issue could work together on areas where they do agree. That would be kind of a nice thing to see, like a situation where, maybe I don't know, there's some kind of, well, obviously let's say a feminist cause, and you could see outspoken gender critical feminists and outspoken kind of trans activist feminists. I don't know, like Laurie Penny or who knows. I mean, I'm trying to think of other kind of feminists who are kind of trans activists. But yeah, basically have them working together. Judith Butler, obviously, I don't know, but she's not really doing much now. That would be a good thing to kind of, and obviously it doesn't even have to be on feminist issues. Like it would be, it would be nice, for example, if let's say for, like a comic relief thing for ending racism or whatever, you could have an outspoken critic of trans activism on there, and the whole world could go, okay, that's fine. Like, let's say J.K. Rowling, for example, like maybe just a situation where J.K. Rowling, who obviously, is reliably a progressive on most issues, could come out and express some kind of support for a movement and, like be actively involved in a movement, and that not be considered controversial. That would be nice. So not even necessarily agreement on or any kind of compromise on transgender issues, but just a situation where it's possible for two people to disagree on trans issues and not to completely be viewed as antagonists.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know how realistic that is.
I mean, it does seem a little impossible at the minute, especially when the argument from the pro-trans side is that, any kind of disagreement to that is some form of violence or something like that. It's like they kind of come down with a very black and white hammer on the situation. That just means that bridging that gap is just so difficult then, especially when they've drummed it into everyone's head that might be the case.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I will say I do think it's one instance why I do think that, and I said this kind of already, but I do think that having the focus be on sort of immediate harm can actually be less helpful, in that I think it makes it easier for trans activists to characterize gender critical feminists as viewing trans people as a threat and as kind of like enemies. So I think I do think when, for example, even though it's completely legitimate, gender critical feminists come out and talk about bathrooms, or I guess even sports in a way. I think with sports the comparison is kind of even less legitimate from the trans activists. But let's just say bathrooms, for example. When when gender critical feminists come out and talk about bathrooms, trans activists will say, so you're saying like that all trans women are enemies who are trying to sneak into your bathrooms and attack you. And obviously it's easy for them to characterize it that way. And obviously with sports, it's like, oh, so you're saying like some person will just go through all of this surgery and stuff just so they can steal a sports position from a woman and things like that. And it becomes easier for them to reframe it. Whereas of course what I prefer to do usually when I'm arguing is say like, well, why are you defining gender that way, and why do you think it makes sense to define gender that way? And of course, why do you think that I should be considered a bigot and horrible for defining gender a different way? Like by putting the focus on defining, well, whether you're a man or a woman, a particular way, I think it makes it much harder for trans activists to be as divisive as they otherwise are. So that's kind of, I guess, in terms of like practical things, that's why I do it, because obviously I'm not unaware of the immediate harm caused by trans activism, but I do think that in focusing on the immediate harm, it kind of adds ammo to trans activists who want to act as if gender critical feminists are just kind of fear mongers who are afraid of trans people barging into their bathrooms and attacking them. So yeah, that's kind of my view.
Yeah, I mean, and that argument is quite annoying because it's actually a bit of a straw man, because it's more about the potential for abuse of that situation rather than all trans people are a certain way. Like that's always seemed to be what the argument is in my mind, but I know what you mean. Like it is easy, especially with the rhetoric that they often have, just in general. It is very easy for them to kind of switch it up in that way, which is it's very tiresome. To be honest.
Yeah, I think with radical feminism, possibly for two reasons. I think first of all is the aspect of it being radical, and I think second of all is the aspect of it having been in the periphery for as long as it has. I do think there is a tendency for people to completely no longer care about optics at all, and not care about trying to present a certain image. And I think you are likely to see, some. I don't know if I said transactivist. Sorry, I meant to say gender critical. I don't know if I said. Okay. Anyway, gender critical feminists. I think you will see some of them kind of say, well, we shouldn't have to try and present any kind of image. And of course, the answer is yes, you shouldn't. But in the terms of actually achieving goals, you probably should. And I do think that kind of radical idea, it does. I think it's similar in a way to actually talk about like lesser of two evils rhetoric when it comes to politics, where, you know, sure, sometimes it is legitimate to say like that both sides are just as bad, but a lot of the time it's also true to say that you're actually causing harm by, you know, not going for the person who is obviously the better choice. And I think even though it might feel like a bit of a compromise of your principles, and I think it's kind of a similar thing with when it comes to rhetoric in relation to optics. It might go, you know, it might be the case that you want to focus on a particular issue and make that your number one issue. But if it's possible that actually in the long term, you will help people much more by maybe focusing on an issue which is perhaps not your top priority, but one which is easier to bring people on board with. And yeah, I wouldn't necessarily claim that I am the best at that. And I do think that there's a degree to which I think I also think it's kind of a case of variety is the spice of life, where it's probably good to have like a few different people saying different things.
Sure.
But yeah, I do think that that's one reason why having the focus be a bit more on kind of just the logic of transactivism, of course, the lack thereof, and also focusing on the fact that people should have the freedom to think about things for themselves and have their own opinions on things like how, you know, gender should be defined, is a kind of good strategy in terms of winning people over.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, I know that. I mean, obviously, I'm biased, but I feel like it. When you can boil things down into kind of common sense arguments, I think that wins a lot of people over. And I think the more that people can do that, the easier it's going to be. I think a lot of the time I find the debates between the pro-trans activists and the, I guess you could say, TERFs or the gender-critical people, they tend to get bogged down in like extra philosophical quandaries and stuff. I think, and I don't know if it really does anything to further the side of the gender critical side, like you say. I think it would be better, and I think you're quite good at this actually, is just figuring out how to make those arguments, you know, not lose the foundation of where they come from, but just become a bit more palatable and packaged for people, you know?
Yeah, I do think so. And, well, I mean, that was a bit, but no, I mean, that's what I try to do. And, you know, I do think it is a case of, I think the trans activist position, I actually do think it has a degree of intuition on its side. I think it's a good example of where actually intuition can often be incoherent. I think there is a desire for a lot of people to kind of understand that, like, let's say, and to be honest, you know, a lot of the time, my instinct, you know, I try to use gender neutral language because I think it just makes it easier to avoid kind of, you know, like shutting people out for unnecessary reasons. Like, obviously, if I start a ContraPoints video and I just go him, he, him, his, you know, people are immediately going to think like, oh, this person's just being kind of incendiary or whatever. So I try to use gender neutral language. Funny thing is, a lot of the time, when I fail to use gender neutral language, a lot of the time, because I'm doing it kind of absent-mindedly, I will actually use somebody's preferred pronouns. So a lot of the time, when I if I'm just kind of writing a script in response to ContraPoints, and I kind of, like I say, accidentally, absent-mindedly include a gendered pronoun, it actually will be a female pronoun. And I think the reason for that is because, yes, I do have this idea of like what a woman is and what a woman should be and what a woman should look like, and ContraPoints does actually fit that idea. But and in that sense, I understand. I think it is true that for a lot of people, possibly more so for men, I'm not sure, there is an intuitive idea of gender and like femininity and being a woman that a lot of trans women do meet. But I think the funny thing is actually that what actually needs to be done is pointed out that, the pointing out of the fact that what is that based in, and I think that's kind of a key thing too, to say like, actually, yes, I can understand why somebody might look at ContraPoints and think, oh, that kind of looks like a woman to me. That actually seems, she, let's say, acts like a woman. She talks like a woman. She kind of looks like a woman. Sure, it's obvious that maybe there's a biological male canvas, but this image that's been painted over it, this costume that's been painted over it, is a woman to me. But I think that the next thing you need to do then is ask, well, why is it a woman? And I think the unfortunate reality is that the only answer you can reach that actually gets to the truth of it is based on sexist stereotypes. Like, because the truth is that if, let's say, you decided you were a woman, I would not intuitively understand you to be a woman. And why would I not intuitively understand you to be a woman? Because you, at least right now, are presenting yourself in a very masculine way. And obviously the issue being, I think most people actually have a kind of intuitive sexist idea of what it means to be a man or a woman. So I actually think that the key thing is to kind of say we need an understanding of gender that is not just intuitive, because I think actually the unfortunate reality is if you ask most people their intuitive understanding of gender in the modern, even 21st century West, you would actually get quite a sexist answer, but also one that is kind of coherent and morally kind of in keeping with the, on the surface, more feminist kind of gender equality society we have right now. And I do think when you actually kind of get to that, when you get to the understanding of gender, like I say, is the most intuitive, coherent, and also kind of morally palatable, the only answer you can get to is biology.
Yeah.
Because you can say, like I say, you can say it's based on appearance and costume, but that actually, when you break it down, I think is not morally palatable, because obviously it's very sexist. You can say it's based on identity, but that is not really intuitive. And also I think for most people, they say it's not really coherent to say like, oh, that you just decide you're a woman and you become a woman, like how's that work? So then, the only one which actually I think can just be, we can all agree, like, okay, that makes sense, and it's not offending anyone, it's quite a neutral way of defining it, is just say, you're being a man or a woman is just a kind of matter-of-fact description of biological reality. That's what, or so I say.
Yeah, and I broadly agree with that as well. So I think we're reaching towards the end now. So I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on, and I think you've outlined really well a lot of the points of view that the gender critical movement has. So I think this is a really good conversation to get that out in the open, because I feel like for a lot of people that's not necessarily clear. So I think you've done a really good job there of kind of making it quite succinct and clear for people. So hopefully this will kind of open some people's eyes to some stuff. So as we're wrapping up, do you want to plug anything at all, or?
I guess I'll just plug my channel. My channel is King Critical. So if you type in King Critical, there's actually a rapper called King Critical. It's funny. I didn't realize that until after I chose a name. I was like, well, I've chosen the name now. Who actually has more subscribers than me, but I'll be there, and you should see me. And if not that, you can actually probably just follow me on Twitter, which is it's King R Farazon, which was my original name. I don't know if you knew that, but my name, I used to be called King R Farazon. Then for a while I was just called King, full stop, and then I decided to add the critical when I decided to focus more on critical stuff. King R Farazon spelled King, King, and then ARPHARAZON, and that's me on Twitter. But yeah, you should be able to find me on YouTube. If not,
okay, I will be posting links in the description as well to those. So I'll post one to your Twitter and one to your YouTube as well. So yeah, thanks again for coming on, and we'll see you guys another time for another interesting discussion.